Hey everybody, it's Trail over at GOHUNT. We are rolling through application season. We've covered Wyoming, we've covered Arizona elk and antelope, and we're going to dive headlong into New Mexico, which is coming up pretty quick. So you got a deadline to apply for all species in New Mexico. That deadline is going to be March 22nd, 2023 by 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Most of the other states are midnight deadlines, so be aware that New Mexico is a little bit different. You have to apply by 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, so be aware of that. A couple ways to apply in New Mexico. The easiest way is to apply online. You simply set up an account and it walks you through the process, and it's very easy to apply in New Mexico. You can also apply on phone if you want to, and we'll drop the number in. My advice to you would be to set up an account online. It makes it a whole lot easier, and you can also keep track of the hunts that you've applied for. Within your account, you'll see your draw results once those come out. So I would highly advise you, if you're going to apply in New Mexico, set up an account and just do it online. We often get asked if you have to buy a hunting license to apply in New Mexico. That did not used to be the case, but it is currently the case in New Mexico. If you want to apply for their hunts there, you do have to buy a non-refundable hunting license. Cost of that license is going to be $65 for a non-resident adult. It's relatively cheap for a youth, so the youth license is only $15. New Mexico is a great state for youth. Primarily, one of the reasons is because of the cost to apply, so you're only $15 plus the application fee, which is going to be $13 per species, and that's regardless of whether it's youth or adult. In addition to that, New Mexico also has no age restriction for youth. You do have to have your kids complete a hunter education course, but as long as they've completed that, they can actually apply for hunts and go hunting as long as they're accompanied by an adult or a mentor. So New Mexico is a great state for youth. I would highly recommend, if you're looking to get your kids involved in hunting, look really hard at New Mexico. I already covered briefly application fee, but you do have a $13 application fee for a non-resident per species that you apply for. So you'll have to take that cost into consideration when you apply. Another commonly asked question we get in regards to cost of applying in New Mexico is, do you have to front the cost of the license that you apply for? And that is the case in New Mexico. You have to front the cost of those licenses. New Mexico has a host of species that you can apply for, including species like bighorn sheep, some exotic species like Barbary sheep, oryx, or ibex. If you're planning on applying for all species in New Mexico, the cost of that's going to be pretty high because you do have to front it on a debit or a credit card. It could be in excess of 10 grand if you decide to go all in on all species for a non-resident. So that's something that you want to take into consideration. You want to make sure that you've got the credit card room, or you may have to space those out across a variety of either debit or credit cards. When you apply, you want to make sure that your credit cards are working good order, that the expiration dates are going to cover the application time frame. So that's something you want to take into consideration. Personally, I don't apply for everything in New Mexico. I would love to, but I just don't have the credit card space that I need to. I kind of pick and choose from year to year on what I'm going to apply for. You do receive a refund if you're unsuccessful in the draw, so it's not like they're going to hold on to that money for a long time. Typically, New Mexico is really good. After they post their draw results, you often get your refund back to the credit card that you used within a couple weeks. So it's not a huge deal, but it's definitely something that you want to keep in mind when you apply. When you look at applying in New Mexico, you're going to see that there are different categories of the hunts. So you often see standard, high quality, and high demand. Some hunts are going to be high quality and high demand. And the difference between those is the cost of the licenses. So the standard license is going to be one cost. The high demand, the high quality hunts, those are going to be a higher cost. The quality hunts are hunts that the state manages for a higher quality experience. Typically larger bucks or bulls, and also typically lower hunting pressure. The standard hunts can still be really good, but once again, it's just not a hunt that they manage for a quality experience like they do those quality hunts. High demand hunts are hunts that have had a certain number of increase in percentage of the number of applicants year over year. And you'll see that hunting in New Mexico is certainly becoming more popular like it is in a lot of Western states. When you apply, you're going to front the cost of the highest price license that you apply for. And I'm going to dive into hunt choices, but be aware those high quality, high demand licenses are going to cost more when you apply. Probably the most commonly asked question in regard to New Mexico is the draw system. So how does the draw system work? New Mexico has a completely random draw. There's no bonus points, there's no preference points in New Mexico. It's completely random. Essentially, every applicant is on an equal playing field for those licenses. And I actually really like that about New Mexico. It's fun to apply in New Mexico. You never know when lightning might strike and you might draw a phenomenal permit. So I very much like their draw system. And once again, it's completely random. The next most commonly asked question we get in regard to their draw system is about hunt choices. So when you apply, you can actually apply for up to 4 hunt choices, and then you have the option to actually click a 5th. You want to be aware that your first 3 choices are the hunts that matter. Your 4th choice, I would only encourage you to apply for a 4th choice if you are willing to accept any tag. Essentially what the state does is they conduct the draw, and any leftover permits they're going to allocate to people that included a hunt as their 4th choice. It may not even be your 4th choice. It might be just a leftover tag in any unit in the state. But by applying for a 4th choice, you're actually indicating that you're willing to accept any leftover permit. So I typically do not advise people to apply for a 4th choice. Really, your first 3 are the ones that are going to matter. When you apply for your 3 hunt choices in New Mexico, they're actually going to take into account all 3 of your choices before they move to the next applicant. So what that means is you could actually draw either your 1st, 2nd, or 3rd choice. So what they're going to do is when they pull your application, they're going to look at your 1st choice, and if all the permits have already been allocated previously, they'll move to your 2nd choice. Same thing, if all those permits have been allocated, they'll move to your 3rd choice. And if all those permits are gone, they're going to skip you and move to the next applicant in the line. So you want to be aware you get 3 choices. You definitely want to include 3 choices because they're going to take all 3 of those into account for each applicant. Now there's some strategy involved in including your 3 hunt choices. Because of the way they do the draw in New Mexico, you want to apply for the lowest odds, best hunt as your 1st choice, and stagger those down to your 2nd and 3rd choice to better odds hunts, which may not be quite as high quality as your 1st choice. The reason that you want to stagger your choices 1st through 3rd from hardest hunt to draw to easiest hunt to draw is because you want to draw the best tag possible. And if they pull your application first off the pile, you want to be given the highest quality hunt on your application and not the hunt that may be, your 3rd choice. It might be a hunt that you just would live with if you drew it. So be aware of that. When you apply in New Mexico, you want to stagger your choices. Lowest odds, best hunt is your 1st choice. Better odds, good hunt as your 3rd choice. So be aware of that when you apply. We often get asked about the pools of permits that are available in New Mexico. So there's 3 pools of permits. You have your resident pool of permits, you have your non-resident pool of permits, and then you have a guided pool of permits that are available. Non-residents can apply for the non-resident permits, or they can apply in the guide pool of permits. And they break that down into permit allocations. So 84% are going to be allocated to residents. Then you're going to have 10% of the permits that are allocated through the guide draw or the guide pool, and then you're going to have 6% that are allocated through residents that are going DIY without a guide. If you decide to go on a guided hunt and apply in that guide pool in New Mexico, you have to have a guide agreement in place before you apply. You can work in conjunction with your guide or outfitter, and they'll actually help you apply, and you get your application in, meaning that you're going to go into that guide pool. When you're deciding what pool to apply for, either the resident, non-resident, or the guided pool, there's some advantages to potentially applying in the guide draw. Some of those advantages are, 1, potentially better odds because fewer people are willing to apply with a guide in that outfitter pool. Secondly, there are more permits. So 10% of those permits are set aside for the guide draw. Now the guide draw is not specific to non-resident or resident. Either resident or non-resident can apply in that guide pool draw. So you want to be aware of that. you do have to have an agreement in place before you apply in that guided draw. So you want to plan ahead, make sure that you contact your outfitter, you get their number, and you make your application accordingly. The guide rule in New Mexico is that you have to hunt 2 full days with a guide or an outfitter, and then beyond that you can actually hunt on your own. So that is an opportunity for people, if you can afford it, to pay that guide fee to hunt those 2 days, or like I said, a full guided hunt, to potentially get into that pool of permits, get into that draw, and maybe get better odds at drawing a better hunt. If you look within your insider account, we actually break out the odds for the guide draw and the non-resident draw. So you want to check those 2 different draw odds, and you want to evaluate the cost to see if potentially going into that guide pool of applicants is beneficial to you. So evaluate the cost, and if it makes sense to you with the better odds, it may be beneficial to apply in the guide draw. Another commonly asked question we get is about group applicants in New Mexico. And you can apply as a group. You can apply as a group of 4 for deer, elk, and antelope, and Barbary sheep. There's no group applications for bighorn sheep or ibex. You can apply as a group of 2 for orcs. So be aware of that. When you apply as a group, that application is considered as one application. And if it's selected, all members of that group will receive a permit for that hunt, provided there are enough permits to satisfy the number of people on your group application. New Mexico will not over allocate permits to cover a group application. So there is the potential to slightly negatively impact your odds if you apply as a group. In the case that you were the last applicant for a tag and maybe there was only 1 tag remaining and you had a group of 2, they would reject your application and move to the next single applicant. So be aware that when you apply. Also, when you're looking at applying as a group, you want to make sure that the hunts you're applying for have had actually enough permits to satisfy a group application. If not, in essence, you're wasting your application because there just isn't enough permits to satisfy the number of people on your app. So be aware of that when you're applying as a group. When you apply as a group, you'll have to designate a group leader. He will go in, make the application, set it up as a group, and then he will be given a number that then he can give to the rest of the members on his group, and they can apply with that number. Everybody will be on that same application. So like I said, it is an option, and there is potential for a slight negative impact in odds, provided there's not enough permits to satisfy your group application. Another commonly asked question we get is about tag returns in New Mexico. So there are no tag returns in New Mexico. If you draw that permit, it's yours, you pay for it, and you're going hunting. There are some exceptions in extreme situations, but for the most part, if you draw a permit, you're going hunting in New Mexico. There are a few other things that I wanted to touch on in New Mexico. Some of them are new rules changes, one of them being that scopes. So magnified scopes on muzzleloaders are no longer allowed. Historically, that's not been the case. When you went to New Mexico, you drew a muzzleloader tag. You could use a modern muzzleloader with a magnified scope. They made a rule change last year. So right now, if you draw a muzzleloader tag in New Mexico, it is open or iron sights only. So be aware of that. Another question we often get asked is about landowner tags in New Mexico. New Mexico does have a pretty robust landowner tag program. You can find those landowner tags either, we have some on our website or on other websites, but if you don't draw a tag in any other state in the West, you're kind of left out with no hunts. New Mexico is a phenomenal state to look at opportunities for landowner tags. They often have elk, deer, antelope landowner tags, so check those opportunities out if you do not draw a permit in any other state. The last couple points I would touch on in regard to New Mexico is that New Mexico has a host of species to hunt. They have some species that you have the opportunity to hunt that do not exist anywhere else in the West, or even in the United States for that matter. So they've got some exotic species, including orcs, ibex, Barbary sheep. They've got desert bighorns, Rocky Mountain bighorns, elk, deer, antelope, Coues deer. There are a bunch of species that you can potentially hunt in New Mexico. What a phenomenal opportunity to go down to the Florida mountains and hunt ibex or Barbary sheep. I'm leaving on a Barbary sheep hunt at the end of this week. So I would take a hard look at those species. It's a really cool opportunity to potentially draw and hunt a species that you may not ever get an opportunity to anywhere else. So take a hard look at New Mexico. I think it's a really cool thing that New Mexico Game and Fish has done in bringing those species into habitats where they've flourished and done really well. Take a look at those. I would definitely encourage you to apply for those exotic species in New Mexico, as well as your standard species like elk, deer, and antelope. Very last, I would say the most critical thing that you need to take into account when applying in New Mexico is draw odds. It's really, really imperative that you use your insider account to review the draw odds and make sure that your strategy is in place to apply accordingly with that strategy. First, second, and third, make sure you include all three choices. We often get asked by people that look at our draw odds and they'll see 100%, and then the two columns next to that, they'll see that there were less permits than there were applicants that applied for that hunt. So people ask, how can it be 100% when that's the case? You have to consider that in New Mexico, they are taking into account every applicant's first three choices. So we're displaying the total number of applicants that included that hunt on their application as any one of their three choices, because you could draw any of your first, second, or third choice. So often what happens is people will have drawn their first or second choice, and they will actually be out of the pool by the time their third choice is considered. So that's why when you look at our draw odds, you can see hunts that display 100% odds, even though there were less permits than there were applicants that are displayed. So be aware of that. Those are still really good hunts to apply for. It's a super commonly asked question, and it's just because the way New Mexico does their draw. So those are the most commonly asked questions that we get for New Mexico. In my mind, New Mexico is a phenomenal state. It's a phenomenal elk state. I would highly suggest that you apply for elk. Any of the exotic species that you're interested in, those are the only opportunities that you can apply for those species in the state. So I would take a hard look at those. They produce giant antelope every single year in New Mexico. It's definitely one of the best trophy states. So applications, like I said, coming up March 22nd, get your application in for New Mexico. If you guys have questions, you can drop them here at the bottom of the video. I'd be happy to answer those. Now's the time, get your app in for New Mexico.